At Christmas dinner, my daughter-in-law raised a glass. She said I'd soon be moved to a facility because this house was theirs now. My son stayed silent. Even my grandchildren looked away. I just smiled. Weeks later, when she brought a realtor to tour the property, the deed in my name stopped them cold. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I returned from my trip, suitcase still in hand, and froze in the doorway of my bedroom. What should have been a place of rest greeted me with devastation. My family photo album lay sprawled across the bed, pages bent and torn. At first I thought perhaps it had fallen, but then I saw the truth. Every picture that contained my face had been ripped out with cruel precision. Decades of memories. My wedding day with James, the moment I held Michael for the first time. Birthdays, holidays, quiet snapshots of an ordinary but treasured life, all mutilated beyond repair. Jagged edges remained where my smile had once been. My hand trembled as I reached for the small, folded note resting on top of the destroyed album. In uneven, childish handwriting were 4 words: worst grandmother in the world. Tears pricked my eyes instantly, but my heart knew what my mind refused to believe. The writing belonged to my 12-year-old grandson Noah, yet this cruel act wasn't his alone. It bore the fingerprints of his mother Lauren, my daughter-in-law, who had long carried a quiet hostility that sharpened into open disdain when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my legs too weak to hold me upright. The trip to Florida had been my first vacation in years, a brief escape to visit my sister. For weeks, Michael had encouraged me to go, insisting I deserved a break. Now I understood why. They had wanted me gone to stage this act of erasure, to carve me out of the family as surely as my image had been carved out of those pages. "Mom, you're back early." I startled at Michael's voice. He stood in the doorway, his face shifting from surprise to a cold blankness the moment he saw what I was holding. "What is this?" My voice was barely a whisper as I raised the note. Michael crossed his arms defensively. "The kids are upset. They feel like you don't care about them. You're always criticizing how Lauren raises them, always acting like your way is the only right way." His words struck me like blows. After everything I had done, raising him alone when James died suddenly of a heart attack, working double shifts to put him through college, even helping with the down payment on this very house. This was how he saw me? I've never once criticized. "You don't have to say it out loud, Mom," he cut me off sharply. "It's in the way you look at us, the way you sigh when the kids eat dinner in front of the TV instead of at the table, and then you just take off on vacation while Noah had his big soccer tournament. You know how important that was to him." My mind spun in confusion. "The tournament? That's next weekend. I planned my return so I'd be here in time. I even bought him new cleats as a surprise." I gestured toward the suitcase still unopened, where the gift lay hidden. For a fleeting moment, guilt flickered in Michael's eyes before he hardened again. "They changed the date, he muttered. "I texted you about it." I grabbed my phone, scrolling through every message. Nothing. "There's nothing here, Michael. You never told me." He turned away, unwilling to meet my gaze. "I need to pick up the kids from school. We can talk about this later." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the ruins of my memories. The tears came at last, not gentle or restrained, but raw, body-racking seas that left me gasping for breath. This house had always been my sanctuary. James and I built our life here. I'd promised to keep it warm and safe when he died, for Michael's sake. For the grandchildren I hadn't even met yet. Now those same walls felt hostile, poisoned by whispers and scheme. I remembered Lauren's subtle hints about assisted living facilities, Michael's casual remarks about friends who had done the right thing by selling their parents' homes. I remembered how they had started studying housing prices, their sudden fixation with real estate. It all made sense now. They didn't just want me out, they wanted this house. And to get it, they were willing to twist my grandchildren's love into weapons against me. Noah and Sophie had once adored me. We baked cookies together, planted vegetables in the backyard, and spent countless evenings curled up with storybooks. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, they had grown distant. Now I understood why. I stared at the torn photographs scattered across the bed. The words on that note cut deeper than any knife ever could. Worst grandmother in the world. By evening, the children returned, but neither came to see me. Michael claimed they had already eaten. Lauren busied herself in the kitchen, never once looking my way. I ate nothing. That night, I lay awake, my heart heavy with betrayal. Every detail of the past years replayed in my mind. Their cold stares, their whispered conversations, the distance that had grown like a shadow between us. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being family and become an obstacle. But as dawn crept in, grief hardened into something else. Clarity, strength. They believed I was powerless. They believed they could erase me. But they had underestimated the very woman who had survived widowhood, raised a son alone, and kept this home alive for half a century. I would not be discarded so easily. Sleep never truly came to me that night. My body ached from exhaustion, yet my mind refused to rest. Memories rose like ghosts from the corners of my room, each one demanding to be felt. I thought of James, my James, who had left this world far too soon. 25 years had passed since that heart attack stole him from me, yet I could still recall the feel of his hand wrapped around mine, the warmth of his voice filling this house with laughter. When he was gone, I made a promise to both of us. I would keep this home alive, a place of safety and love for our son and for whatever family he might one day have. After James died, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Michael was 17, teetering on the edge of adulthood. He needed me steady, not broken. I worked double shifts at the hospital, then weekends as a receptionist at the dentist's office, pouring every ounce of strength into survival. Somehow, between exhaustion and grief, I managed to keep this house standing and to save enough to send him to college without debt. I remember the day of his graduation, how I sat alone in the auditorium, the empty seat beside me reserved for James in spirit. My pride had been overwhelming. My son walking across that stage, receiving his degree. I thought then that every sacrifice had been worth it. When Michael brought Lauren into our lives, I welcomed her with open arms. She was poised, ambitious, sharp, qualities I respected, even admired. If she seemed distant, I told myself it was nerves. That time would smooth the edges between us. Michael reassured me often. She's just intimidated, Mom. You're strong, independent, the kind of woman who raised a son alone and kept a house running. Give her time. But time did not heal. Time built walls. After their wedding, when they decided to live here rather than find a home of their own, I offered to move out. I even suggested turning the downstairs den into a bedroom for myself, leaving them the master suite upstairs. This house is too special to sell, Michael had insisted. I want my kids to grow up here the way I did. At first, I believed him. I believed he wanted to preserve memories. Now I understood. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about ownership. Somewhere along the line, his gratitude had curdled into entitlement. When Noah was born, I retired early from nursing to help. I became the caretaker, the one who rocked him to sleep, who sat at the kitchen table with him when fever spiked. When Sophie arrived 3 years later, I was more than a grandmother. I was a second mother. We created traditions together, filling the days with pancakes shaped like animals, backyard gardens, bedtime stories whispered under blankets. Those were years of grourishing, of belonging. But then Lauren began pulling them away from me, one small step at a time. My offers to help with homework were declined. My suggestions for outings were dismissed. If I entered the living room, she guided the children upstairs. I told myself it wasn't intentional. I wanted to believe she was only finding her own way as a mother. But each exclusion chipped away at my place in this family until I became a shadow in my own home. What hurt most was watching Noah and Sophie change. Their eager footsteps down the hallway when they were little had once been the music of my days. They used to rush into my arms, smudging my clothes with flour from cookie dough or dirt from the garden. Now Noah barely looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet resentment he was too young to fully understand. Sophie, though softer, had grown hesitant, as if loving me openly would invite punishment. That night, after Michael walked out on my questions, I lay awake, hearing the silence of the house press against me. Every memory twisted itself into evidence. Lauren's clipped remarks about people your age. Michael's casual comments about parents who sold their homes to give their children a head start. Their hushed conversations about the housing market, suddenly so important once property values began to rise. It all came together with cruel clarity. They wanted this house, not someday, not in the distant future when I was gone, now. And to get it, they were willing to poison Noah and Sophie's hearts against me. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. Love had been the foundation of this family, the soil from which every sacrifice had grown. Now to be told I was nothing more than a burden. It was a betrayal that hollowed me out from within. But even in the ache of betrayal, a fire stirred. They believed I would remain quiet, shrinking smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of me but a signed deed in an empty room. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. They had mistaken silence for surrender. I had survived widowhood. I had survived endless shifts at the hospital, raising a boy alone when my world had already fallen apart once before. I was Evelyn Carter. This home had my fingerprints on every wall, my sweat in every beam, my love in every corner. If they wanted to strip me away, they would find I was not so easily erased. Some betrayals are so sharp they cut deeper than any blade. They tear through trust, through love, leaving only the raw wound of disbelief. That morning, after another sleepless night, I realized my family had written me off as powerless, an obstacle to be removed. They thought I would fade quietly. They were wrong. I sat at the kitchen table before dawn, a cup of tea cradled in my hands, staring out the window as the first light stretched across the yard. It had been my ritual for decades, the one place where I allowed myself to gather strength before the house came alive. In those quiet moments, I thought of James. He had died at only 42, leaving me to raise Michael alone. I had packed away my grief and worked myself raw so Michael could have every chance his father would have wanted for him. I had carried that burden without complaint, certain that one day he would understand the depth of my devotion. But now, as I remembered the way he looked at me yesterday, with cold dismissal instead of love, I saw how badly I had misjudged. The son I sacrificed for had turned me into a villain in his children's eyes. Lauren's influence stripped like poison into their young hearts. And if I did nothing, my legacy, my very place in this family, would vanish. I reached for the thick envelope lying on the table. Inside was the new deed prepared by my lawyer just 2 days earlier. My name, Evelyn Carter, marked the top. The words below carved my decision in stone. Only those who care for me until my last breath will inherit this house. It was not vengeance. It was survival. For 50 years, I had poured my soul into this home, and I would not allow greed to rip it away while I still breathed. If Michael and Lauren wanted the house, they would need to prove their love in deeds, not words. The following Sunday, I prepared dinner as I always had, though the atmosphere in the house had long since soured. Lauren's dishes were precise, efficient, but cold. Japandong. Michael scrolled through his phone between bites. The children watched silently, their young faces a mirror of tension they could not understand. I baked apple pie, Noah and Sophie's favorite, hoping the familiar scent might soften the harshness of what was to come. When the table had settled into its dull rhythm, I laid the envelope beside my plate. My voice was calm, though my heart thundered in my chest. I need to talk to you all about something important. Michael looked up, startled. Is everything okay, Mom? You're not sick, are you? There was a flicker of genuine concern, and for a moment I almost faltered. But then I saw Lauren's stiff posture, her sharp eyes narrowing at the sight of the envelope, and my resolve hardened. I'm perfectly healthy, I said. This is about the house. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Lauren's knuckles whitened around her fork. What about the house? I've been thinking about my will, about what happens to this place after I'm gone. After finding my photo album last week, I realized I needed to make things very clear. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, that was just a misunderstanding. Noah was upset. Kids do impulsive things sometimes. I turned to my grandson, who kept his eyes fixed on his plate. Is that true, Noah? Did you tear up all those pictures of me? He glanced at his mother, then shrugged. I was mad. Don't question him now, Lauren snapped. We've already discussed it as a family. Her words pierced me. A family. Yet somehow I was not part of that circle. I slid the envelope across the table. This is the new deed. I've transferred ownership into a trust. The house will go to whoever cares for me in my final years, whoever stays with me until my last breath. Michael's face drained of color as he pulled the papers free. His voice trembled with anger. You can't be serious. This is emotional blackmail. Is it? I asked quietly. Or is it simply asking for the same care and respect I've given all of you for years? We've always planned to take care of you, Lauren said, her tone rising. But this kind of legal manipulation, is that why I overheard you suggesting I look into assisted living? I interrupted, my voice cutting through hers. Is that why Sarah Lewis, the real estate agent, has been visiting when you thought I was out? Their stunned silence confirmed everything they never imagined I had noticed. Grandma? Sophie's small voice broke the tension. Her wide eyes searched mine. Are you going away? I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. No, sweetheart, this is my home. I'm not leaving. Lauren shoved her chair back abruptly. Children, go upstairs. The room fractured as Noah and Sophie slipped away, leaving the three of us at war across the table. Michael leaned forward, desperation sharpening his voice. Mom, you have to understand. Housing prices have tripled. We're drowning in debt, student loans, school tuition. We were just exploring options. Options that never included talking to me, I replied, because you're so stubborn. Lauren burst out, her mask slipping. You refuse to admit that at your age this house is too much. We were being practical. Practical, I echoed. Practical would have been honesty. I rose from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My voice was calm, steady, carved from the steel of years of survival. The deed is filed. The decision is made. If you want this house, show me with your actions, not your words. I walked away, leaving the untouched pie cooling on the table behind me. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Thompson watering her garden next door. She lifted her hand in a gentle wave, her face etched with concern. For 50 years, she had been my neighbor, my witness through joy and sorrow. She, more than anyone, knew what I had given to this house. Upstairs, Lauren's voice rose in sharp, angry bursts. Michael answered in low tones, the kind of hushed argument that carries more venom than shouting ever could. I didn't need to hear the words to know their meaning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I had just declared war. The house grew colder in the days that followed, not in temperature, but in spirit, as if walls that once held warmth now pulsed with hostility. Lauren's anger pressed against me like a storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. She oscillated between silence so sharp it sliced and pleasantries so forced they felt like mockery. Michael tried to stand somewhere in the middle, his eyes often flickering with conflict. But his loyalty leaned where it always did, toward his wife. The children, my sweet grandchildren, were not spared from this silent war. Noah avoided me altogether, slipping past me in hallways as though I had turned invisible. The note he had written, or rather been coerced into writing, seemed to hang between us, a wedge driven deep by hands older and colder than his. At 12, he was old enough to understand blame, but too young to resist carrying it. Sophie was different. At 9, her heart was still soft, still guided more by love than by the politics of adults. I caught her watching me sometimes with wide, uncertain eyes that silently begged for answers. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch swing with the creak of chains above me, Sophie padded out quietly, her small hands twisting the hem of her shirt. She climbed up beside me without a word, legs swinging in nervous rhythm. "Grandma," she whispered at last, "are you really the worst grandma in the world?" Her question pierced me. My throat tightened, my eyes stung, but I forced myself to stay steady for her sake. I smoothed a strand of her hair behind her ear. "What do you think, Sophie? Do you believe I'm a bad grandma?" She kicked her legs thoughtfully, her little brow furrowing. "Mom says you try to control everything, that you think your way is the only right way." "And do you see me doing that?" I asked gently. "I don't know," she murmured. "I just remember when you used to read me stories and make pancakes shaped like animals. Now everything feels different." Her words cracked something inside me. I had missed those mornings too. The laughter, the sticky hands reaching for more syrup, the joy of belonging. I miss those times, I admitted softly. She hesitated before adding, Mom says we might have to move because you're being selfish with the house. The cruelty of those words, planted in her young mouth, hit harder than any insult Lauren could have hurled at me directly. I wanted to rage, to shout that I had spent decades pouring my life into this family, that selfishness had never been my sin. But I swallowed the fire. Sophie needed gentleness, not more conflict. Before I could answer, Lauren's voice cut across the yard. Sophie, where are you? The little girl's eyes widened with guilt, as if she had been caught in something forbidden. She slid off the swing, whispering, I'm sorry, before scurrying back inside. Lauren appeared moments later, her arms crossed, her gaze cold enough to freeze. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't try to turn my daughter against me. I met her stare, refusing to shrink. Is that what you think I'm doing? Or is that simply what you've been doing with my grandchildren? Her lips curved into a bitter smile. You brought this on yourself, Evelyn. We were willing to take care of you in your old age, but on reasonable terms, not with this emotional ransom note you've created. Taking care of me was never part of your plan, I said, my voice calm though my pulse hammered. You've been researching nursing homes. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Color rose in her face. That was preliminary research. Nothing had been decided. Nothing had been discussed with me, the person whose life you were planning. Her mask slipped entirely then, her voice snapping sharp as glass. This house is wasted on one elderly woman. Do you have any idea what we could do with the money if we sold it? The opportunities we could give Noah and Sophie? I steadied my voice, though it trembled inside me. And what about my opportunity to live my final years with dignity in the home I've cared for half a century? Lauren laughed, brittle and joyless. Dignity? Is that what you call this power play? Michael is devastated. He always thought your love was unconditional. My love is unconditional, I said firmly, but my house is not. That night, Michael confronted me in the kitchen, his face weary, his tone laced with frustration. Mom, this has gone far enough. Brenda and I, we're willing to compromise. We'll set aside money from the sale of the house for your care, a generous amount. I turned from the sink, drying my hands slowly on a towel. So your plan is still to sell my home out from under me? It's the family home, he argued. Dad would have wanted. Don't you dare tell me what your father would have wanted, I cut in, my voice sharp. James built this life with me. He would be ashamed of how you're treating me now. Michael's face hardened, but I pressed on. What's unfair is being treated like a burden by my own son. What's unfair is having my grandchildren turned against me because you and Lauren want my property. His shoulders slumped slightly, but he said nothing. The silence between us ached with everything neither of us wanted to admit. The doorbell rang then, breaking the tension. Mrs. Thompson stood with a covered dish in her hands, her eyes flicking between us with quiet concern. Thought you might like some company. And my chicken pot pie, she said cheerfully, pretending not to notice the heavy air. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of comfort. In that moment, with her kindness at my door and the echo of Sophie's uncertain voice still in my ears, I knew this fight was far from over. But I also knew I was not entirely alone. Some truths slip quietly into the open, carried not by shouting or force, but by the soft voices of children who cannot lie. When love is twisted by greed, innocence becomes the first casualty, and sometimes the only light left. Sophie began finding her way back to me in secret. In the afternoons, when Lauren busied herself at yoga class and Michael was still at work, she would tiptoe into my sitting room, pretending to borrow books, but really searching for comfort. She curled into the armchair opposite mine, her small legs swinging, her eyes curious yet weighted with questions too heavy for a child. One rainy Tuesday, she pressed her forehead to the window pane, watching droplets chase one another down the glass. Why does Mom hate you so much? She asked suddenly, her voice as direct as only a child's could be. I set down my knitting, my heart tightening. I don't think she hates me, sweetheart. I think she's afraid. Sophie turned to me with doubt clouding her face. Mom's not afraid of anything. Everyone is afraid of something, I said gently. Your mother is afraid of not being able to give you and Noah everything she wants for you. She's afraid of failing her own expectations. Sophie twisted a strand of hair around her finger, frowning. Is that why she wants to sell the house? To get money for our stuff? Her bluntness pierced me. Partly, but it's more complicated than that. She chewed her lip, then whispered, Noah says we're moving to a bigger house where we won't have to share a bathroom, and you'll go live somewhere else with other old people. The casual cruelty of it stung, though I knew it was not Noah's voice but Lauren's echoed through him. I steadied myself. Is that what you want, Sophie? For me to live somewhere else? Her head shook so quickly her hair brushed her cheeks. No, I like our house, and I don't want you to go away. Who would help me with my science projects? Her plea wrapped around me like a fragile thread, reminding me that not all bonds had been severed. Later that week, another fragile thread appeared. Without telling anyone, I took a taxi to Noah's soccer game. I hadn't dared hope he would notice me in the crowd, but when he scored the winning goal and turned toward the stands, our eyes met. For a breathless moment, recognition softened his face. After the game, he approached hesitantly, cleats kicking at the dirt. You came, he said, half accusation, half surprise. I've always loved watching you play, I told him, my voice steady with truth. He glanced down, his young face caught between loyalty to his parents and the memory of our bond. Dad says you're trying to control us with the house thing. I'm trying to protect myself, Noah. There's a difference. He looked up then, eyes searching mine with a vulnerability that reminded me so much of Michael at that age. Mom and Dad fight a lot about money. She says it's your fault because you changed the deed. My heart ached for him, for the burden placed on his young shoulders. The problem started long before that, sweetheart. Adults sometimes make choices that cause stress later. The house didn't cause this. Before I could say more, Lauren appeared, her expression like thunder. Noah, go wait in the car with your father. He obeyed, casting one last uncertain glance at me. When he was out of earshot, Lauren turned on me, her fury unleashed. How dare you come here? Filling his head with your version of things, this is exactly the kind of manipulation I won't tolerate. I held her gaze, refusing to flinch. I didn't speak against you. I came to support my grandson, something I've done since he was 5 years old. I'll just stay away from my children unless I'm present, she hissed, or I'll make sure you never see them again, house or no house. She stormed off, leaving me standing in the shadow of her rage. But the world has a way of offering lifelines when darkness presses too close. Across the field, Mrs. Thompson waved, her face filled with a concern. She crossed over, touching my arm. That didn't look pleasant, she said softly. It wasn't, I admitted. Well, she smiled gently, I have something that might cheer you up. The neighborhood association is holding a community dinner next weekend. Everyone's been asking about your famous apple pie. We were hoping you'd come. Her invitation was more than a social event. It was a reminder that Lauren could not erase me from the world outside these walls, that I was still known, still valued, still loved beyond the narrow reach of my son's household. I'd love to, I said, a smile breaking through the ache in my chest. As I walked home from the field, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope, fragile, flickering but alive. Lauren believed she could corner me, isolate me, and turn my family against me. What she didn't understand was that my roots ran deeper than her schemes. My life stretched far beyond the walls of this house, and though cracks had formed in my family, those same cracks were letting light back in. The night of the neighborhood dinner arrived with a nervous flutter in my chest. For months, my world had been reduced to icy silences and sharp words within the walls of my home. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be welcomed without suspicion. Carrying a warm apple pie, I walked into the Riverside Community Center with my head held high, though my heart beat like a drum. The moment I stepped inside, familiar faces turned toward me, and the weight I had carried for weeks began to ease. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in far too long greeted me with genuine warmth. Evelyn, we've missed you at the gardening club, said Eleanor Peterson, her hands wrapping around mine. Your hydrangea tip saved my flower beds last summer. Is that your famous Carter apple pie? Called Frank Cooper, the retired mailman who had delivered letters to this neighborhood for 30 years. My wife's been trying to copy it for decades, but she never gets it right. Laughter rippled through the group, light and unforced, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I remembered who I was outside of Michael and Lauren's shadow. I was not only a mother, not only a grandmother, I was Evelyn Carter, a neighbor, a friend, a woman who had lived, worked, and loved in this community for half a century. The evening wrapped me in a warmth I hadn't known I craved. As I served slices of pie, I found myself smiling, my shoulders loosening from their constant tension. People asked about me, not about the house, not about inheritance, just me. Their kindness was a balm, reminding me that Lauren's coldness did not define my worth. Evelyn, a familiar voice drew my attention. Helen Morris, my old colleague from the hospital, stood before me, her eyes full of quiet concern. We had weathered long nights on maternity shifts together, shared sandwiches in break rooms, and leaned on one another through grief and exhaustion. Seeing her again brought a rush of memories. I heard from Mrs. Thompson that things have been difficult, Helen said gently. I wanted to introduce you to someone. She motioned to a woman beside her. This is Catherine Brooks, an attorney who specializes in elder rights. She volunteers with our senior advocacy program. Catherine offered her hand, her smile warm but professional. Your friend mentioned you have been under pressure at home. Family situations can become complicated. If you ever need guidance, you don't have to face it alone. I accepted her card with trembling fingers, slipping it into my purse. Thank you, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was thanking her for her offer or simply for recognizing the truth without judgment. Later that night, when I returned home, Sophie was waiting for me on the porch. Her small figure looked fragile in the glow of the porch light, but her eyes held a determination beyond her years. Grandma, she whispered urgently, I need to show you something. She led me quickly upstairs, checking the hallway to ensure her parents were still out at dinner. In her room, she pulled a crumpled paper from beneath her mattress. It was a foreclosure notice, the bank's seal sharp against the wrinkled page. I found this in Dad's office, she confessed. Are they going to take our house too? The sight of the letter made my stomach twist. My son and his wife were drowning in debts they had hidden from me. Debts they thought they could erase by stripping me of the only thing I had left. Sweetheart, I said softly, drawing her close. This is grown-up business. You shouldn't have to worry about it. But they're using it to be mean to you, she insisted, her small voice breaking. I heard them talking. Mom said once they get your house, everything will be fixed. Her words burned through me. I held her tighter, fighting back the tears. Let me handle this, Sophie. Promise me you won't take any more papers from their office. That isn't your responsibility. She nodded reluctantly, her little hands clutching mine. Can I still come visit you, even though Mom said I shouldn't? I kissed the top of her head. My door is always open for you, always. The next morning I made a choice. I could no longer fight shadows and whispers. The truth had to be dragged into the light. I called Michael at work. My voice did not tremble, though my hands shook as I gripped the phone. Come home for lunch, alone. He hesitated, then agreed. At noon, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, a silence stretching between us like a gulf. I laid the foreclosure notice in front of him, his face drained of color. Where did you get this? His voice was tight, defensive. That's not important, I said. What matters is that you're in serious financial trouble. And instead of asking for help, you've been manipulating your own children against me while plotting to take my home. Michael pressed his hands to his forehead, his voice breaking. It's not what you think. The timeshare was supposed to be an investment. We got in over our heads, but it's manageable. Is it? Because I see more than a timeshare. Private school tuition, Lauren's student loans, the new cars, the vacations. It's all adding up, Michael, and now you expect me to pay the price. His eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the boy he once was. The boy who wanted to do right but didn't know how. I didn't want to disappoint you, he whispered. You worked so hard for me. I wanted to give my kids the same. Oh, Michael, I sighed, tears brimming in my eyes. I've always been proud of you, but not for what you provide. I'm proud when you show honesty, integrity, kindness. That's what matters. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. For the first time in months, he looked less like Lauren's echo and more like my son. There comes a moment when silence can no longer shield the truth. It rises, relentless until every hidden secret cracks open. In families, those truths cut the deepest because they are carved from love turned bitter. Michael sat across from me, the foreclosure notice still trembling in his hands. His face, so much like James's, was etched with defeat. For the first time in months, his anger had dimmed, leaving only the raw fear of a man who had lost control. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "I didn't want you to find out like this. I thought I could fix it before it came to this." I leaned forward, my voice steady though my heart raced. "Fix it by taking my house? By teaching my grandchildren to see me as selfish?" His head dropped, shame pulling his shoulders down. I didn't know what else to do. Lauren kept saying this house was the answer, that selling it would solve everything. And you believed her. He flinched at the quiet accusation. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock ticked, the sound far louder than it should have been. I searched his face, looking for the boy I had raised, the boy who once leaned on me with unshakable trust. "You don't have to carry this alone, Michael," I said at last, softer now. "I carried you through years of hardship. I carried you when your father died, when I worked 2 jobs so you could walk across that stage with no debt weighing you down. Do you think I did all that just so you could repay me with deceit?" Tears filled his eyes. He blinked them back, but his voice broke anyway. "I didn't want you to be disappointed in me." I reached across the table, laying my hand over his. "I am disappointed, not in your struggles, but in how you chose to face them. Michael, I've always been proud of you, but not because of money or success. Proud because of your kindness, your honesty, your heart. That's all I ever wanted for you." Something shifted then. A crack appeared in the wall he had built around himself. His hand trembled under mine, but he didn't pull away. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. "Face the truth. Meet with a financial advisor, a real one, not whoever convinced you that timeshares were wise. Learn the difference between what you need and what you want. Stop hiding from me. Stop using my house as your solution." He nodded slowly, his breath unsteady. "I should have talked to you from the beginning." "Yes," I said simply, "you should have." The days that followed brought small, tentative changes. Michael and Lauren met with an advisor. They started the painful process of selling the timeshare, finally admitting the weight of their debts. The air in the house remained strained, but no longer suffocating. Noah began to waver. Some evenings, I found him lingering in my sitting room, spreading his homework on the small table, pretending he simply wanted a quiet place to work. But I caught the sideways glances he gave me, as if testing whether he could trust me again. I gave him space, letting him come and go without pressure. Trust, once broken, could only be rebuilt with patience. Sophie, bolder now, visited me openly. She perched on the edge of my chair, telling me about school, about the book we were reading together in secret, about the little science experiments she wanted to try again. Her laughter began to return, and with it, so did mine. Lauren remained icy, civil but cold, as though conceding a battle she had not truly lost. Yet one night I overheard her on the phone with her sister, her voice hushed but fierce. "No, we're not moving her into a facility," she snapped. "Michael and I agreed. That's the end of it." It wasn't affection, not even acceptance. But it was something, one less knife pointed at my back. Meanwhile, I found a new rhythm outside the house. Helen had urged me to join the senior advocacy program at Riverside Center, and though I hesitated, I eventually agreed. Twice a week, I sat with men and women who carried stories much like mine. Stories of being overlooked, pressured, manipulated by the very children they had once sacrificed everything for. Some had been forced from their homes, others isolated until their voices barely carried. I listened, I advised, I reminded them and myself that love does not mean surrender. For the first time in months, I felt purpose coursing through me. My pain had a place to go, transformed into something that might protect others. 6 months after I changed the deed, I decided it was time for a new beginning. I invited Michael, Lauren, and the children to a family dinner. Not the cold, formal meals we had endured, but one prepared entirely by me, filled with the warmth of tradition. When the table was set and everyone seated, I placed a fresh envelope in Michael's hands. His eyes flickered with fear, but I smiled gently. "This isn't a threat. It's an amendment. Inside, they found not only the terms of the trust, but something new, the creation of the Evelyn and James Carter Family Support Fund, a foundation built from my savings. It would provide educational grants for Noah, Sophie, and any grandchildren yet to come. Lauren's expression softened, her eyes flickering with something like shame. Michael's face crumpled, and for the first time in a long while, tears welled openly. "We've been so wrong," he whispered, "about everything." I reached across the table once more, not as an enemy, but as a mother. This was never about punishment. It's about legacy. Love is not measured in inheritance, but in truth, respect, and the courage to face mistakes together. For the first time in over a year, I saw hope reflected back at me, not just in Sophie's eyes, but in Michael's. Even Noah looked at me differently, his young face uncertain, but softer, as if some of the poison had finally begun to drain away. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was fragile, full of possibility. The weeks that followed carried a fragile shift through the house. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was no longer war. Michael and Lauren began seeing a financial advisor regularly, their evenings filled with hushed but serious conversations. For the first time in years, they admitted to themselves that the weight of their lifestyle had dragged them into a quiet ruin. The timeshare in Aspen was sold at a loss, but it was gone, and with it went one anchor pulling them under. I watched these changes with cautious relief. The tension between us had not dissolved, but it had thinned. The air inside our home no longer felt poisoned. It carried something unfamiliar, something almost hopeful. Noah surprised me most. At first, he lingered on the edges, pretending not to care. But one evening, as I watered the ferns in my sitting room, I found him already there, sprawled on the rug with his math homework. He didn't ask permission. He didn't explain. He simply worked in silence, his pencil tapping the page, his shoulders stiff with a kind of stubborn defiance. I didn't comment. I only set a small plate of cookies on the table and returned to my chair. Minutes passed before he reached for one, chewing carefully, sneaking a glance in my direction. His lips twitched, almost a smile, before he bent over his work again. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, a bridge being rebuilt plank by plank. Sophie no longer hid her visits. She came openly, chattering about school projects, showing me drawings, curling beside me as I read to her. Her laughter returned like spring after a long winter, filling my room with warmth. She began leaving little gifts on my dresser, painted rocks, folded notes, drawings of our family that still included me. Each one was a balm to wounds I thought might never heal. Lauren remained distant, though her hostility had dulled into civility. She spoke to me when necessary, her tone clipped but not cruel. One night I overheard her arguing with her sister over the phone. "No, we're not putting her in a facility," she snapped. Michael and I decided that's final. It wasn't affection, but it was an end to one battle, and for that I was grateful. Beyond the walls of our home, my life stretched into something new. Helen Morris encouraged me to join the senior advocacy program at Riverside Center. At first, I hesitated, still raw from my own wounds. But when I walked into that bright, busy room filled with faces lined by years of sacrifice, I knew I belonged. Twice a week, I sat with men and women whose stories mirrored mine. A mother whose children had pushed her to sell her home too early, leaving her trapped in a facility she hated. A widower whose family siphoned his pension until he was left with nothing. A grandmother whose daughter spoke only of money, never love. Their voices were soft, heavy with years of endurance, but I heard in them the same ache I carried. I listened. I shared. I guided them when I could, my nursing background giving me language for things they didn't know how to name: emotional manipulation, financial coercion, isolation. Words that stripped away the fog of guilt. Each conversation was a thread binding me back to purpose. For the first time in months, I felt strong again, not just for myself, but for others. At home, the children began seeking me out more often. Noah sat with me during quiet evenings, sometimes asking for help on assignments, sometimes just sharing space in silence. Sophie often tugged my hand toward the kitchen, begging to bake cookies or pancakes shaped like stars. Even Michael began to soften, his conversations gentler, his eyes holding the weight of remorse. One evening, as I prepared tea, he entered the kitchen hesitantly. "Mom," he said, voice low, "we've decided to scale back. The kids will stay in public school for now, and we're selling one of the cars." I turned, studying him. His words were halting, but his expression was steady. "It's not easy," he admitted, "but it's the right thing to do." For the first time in years, I felt proud of him. Not as a provider, not as a man with possessions, but as a son brave enough to face his mistakes. The house itself seemed to change with us. Where there had been icy silence, there was now tentative conversation. Where bitterness had lingered in the air, there was now the faint sweetness of possibility. It wasn't perfect. Lauren still kept her distance, her smiles brittle, her trust in me fractured. But her voice had lost its venom. She no longer whispered about real estate agents or assisted living. She no longer dismissed me as a burden in front of the children. The hostility that once filled every room had dulled into uneasy truce. For me, that was enough. One evening after the children had gone to bed, I sat on the porch swing where James and I had spent countless nights watching the world settle into quiet. I rocked gently, listening to the creak of the chains, the hum of cicadas in the summer night. The house around me was not whole, not yet, but it was breathing again, and so was I. 6 months had passed since I signed the papers that changed everything. 6 months of tense silences, giving way to fragile conversations, of old wounds beginning to scab over, of the faintest threads of trust weaving themselves back into this fractured family. It was time, I decided, to bring us all back to the table, not as adversaries, but as family. That evening, I set the kitchen alive with the scents of my past. Roast chicken, fresh rolls, and apple pie cooling on the counter. It wasn't just a meal. It was a reminder of what this house had always been meant to hold. The children bounded in first, Sophie chattering with excitement, Noah quieter but watchful. Michael followed, weary but calmer, and Lauren came last, her face guarded, yet free of the sharpness it once carried. We ate together, the conversation halting at first, then warming with the rhythm of shared food and old memories. I waited until the plates were nearly empty before I placed an envelope on the table, the cream paper glowing in the soft lamplight. Michael stiffened, his fork clinking against his plate. "Mom," he began cautiously, "what is this?" I smiled gently. "It's not a punishment, it's a gift." He opened the envelope slowly, his eyes scanning the words, widening as their meaning took shape. Inside was the amendment to the trust, my decision to keep the house under the same condition, that it would go to the one who cared for me until my final breath. But alongside it was something new, something unexpected. "I've established the Evelyn and James Carter Family Support Fund," I explained, my voice steady. "It will provide educational grants for Noah, for Sophie, and for any grandchildren who come after. Your father and I always believed education was the greatest gift we could give. Now that legacy will continue." Michael's eyes glistened. He pressed the papers flat against the table, unable to speak at first. At last his voice cracked. "We've been so wrong about everything. I thought you were just holding on to the house out of stubbornness. I didn't understand." Lauren's hand moved across the table, almost hesitant, resting atop mine. Her touch was awkward, but sincere. "I thought it was about control," she admitted softly. "I never realized it was about dignity, about respect." "It was never about control," I said, meeting her eyes. "It has always been about family, the kind that holds each other up, the kind that faces storms together instead of tearing one another down." Sophie leaned forward, her small hand slipping into mine. "So we get to stay here? All of us?" I kissed her knuckles gently. "Yes, sweetheart. This will always be our home, as long as it is filled with love." Across the table, Noah shifted in his seat, his voice quiet but certain. "I'm sorry, Grandma." His eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw the boy I had known, the boy who once ran into my arms without hesitation. My throat tightened, but I managed a smile. "There's nothing to forgive," I told him. "We were all lost for a while. What matters is that we found our way back." Later that night, after the dishes had been washed and the house had gone still, I stepped out onto the porch swing. The wood creaked beneath me as I settled into the familiar rhythm, the summer air soft against my skin. I thought of James, of the evenings we had spent here watching the neighborhood change, dreaming about the life we were building. I whispered his name into the quiet, certain he would have been proud, not of the trust fund, not of the deed, but of the fact that love had not been entirely extinguished, even after all the bitterness. The house around me was no longer just walls and beams. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was the sound of children's laughter returning after too long an absence. It was Michael's eyes wet with regret, Lauren's hand trembling with newfound humility, Sophie's trust, Noah's apology. It was proof that wealth has never been about property values or bank accounts. True wealth is measured in love, messy, painful, imperfect, but love all the same. This house would one day continue without me, but its legacy and mine would not be the bricks or the wood. It would be the lessons written into every corner, the reminder that dignity is worth defending, and that family, even broken, can find its way back to each other. I rocked gently, letting the cicadas' chorus rise into the night. For the first time in years, peace settled across my chest. Evelyn Carter had not been erased. She had been heard. She had been seen. And her love, fierce and unyielding, would echo long after her last breath. Evelyn's story is not only about inheritance, it is about the courage to demand respect, the resilience to withstand betrayal, and the power of truth to mend what greed tried to destroy. If her journey touched you, share it with someone who needs reminding that love is worth fighting for. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story that cuts to the heart. Because sometimes the hardest battles we fight are not for property or possessions, but for the dignity to be loved as we deserve.